Welcome to the Golf Course, a modern forum for business conversations in insurance. I'm your host, Carrie Ann Nadeau, founder and CEO of ODN. I've invited Paul Tetrault to join me on the golf course. Paul is the Executive Director of the Insurance Library, a hidden gem of information, resources, and knowledge about the evolution of insurance products and new innovations spanning back 132 years. Let's tee it off. Welcome back to the golf course. This is Carrie Ann Nadeau, founder and CEO of ODN and your host. Here today on the golf course with Paul Tetrault. He runs the Insurance Library as the Executive Director, and we're actually in the library today. We did a little field trip up to the beautiful city of Boston to visit Paul in person. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, and welcome to the library. Happy to have you as a visitor, and it's one of the things I want to let people know during this segment is the Insurance Library is a great place to visit. So if you're in the insurance and risk management business, feel free to stop by anytime during regular business hours.
It's like the warmest welcome to a library, right? You walk into a public library and everyone's quiet and sort of kept to themselves. But it seems like you guys are here to help the industry better understand itself and sort of keep record of really the history of the industry as well.
We definitely try to have a welcoming atmosphere here. As I said, if you're part of the risk management and insurance business, we're sort of the library for your community. And yes, a lot of what we do here is we're a repository for the history of the industry. We've been here since 1887, not specifically this location, but the library's been in existence for over 130 years.
So you have books going back 130 years.
We do. We have a collection of historic materials that's been kept on building right up until this day, and we have modern materials as well, a lot of legal treatises and resources in that area. Journals some journals have been around for more than a century, and we have everything going back to more than a century, as well as their latest editions as last week and this week. So really cover the gamut. So
a person comes into the library. Oftentimes they come with a research question, or do people come to poke around?
A little more the former. People sort of typically use us, as a resource for research. That's sort of the most practical use, I guess, for the collection.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of lawyers and law firms are members and frequent users of our research services, both our collections and our librarians who are experts in conducting insurance research tasks. And then it'll be insurance companies, brokers. They'll have a reason to use our research services for maybe product development, sometimes something called a company trace, where you want to find out what company was writing in what area or what lines at a certain time. So we have the ability to do those kinds of things as well.
Wow, that's really awesome. So you talked about the librarians upstairs, and I think just in the short time that we've had together this morning and perusing the stacks and asking silly questions and trying to better understand things that are relevant to me, I found the librarians here it's almost like they have the library in their brain.
They do to a large extent. Megan Stefano and Sarah Hart are the librarians. They've both been here for more than 15 years each.
Wow.
So during that time, they've become familiar and they really know the collection backwards and forwards, and they've conducted all kinds of research tasks for all kinds of patrons. So they really know what they're looking for. They know how to look for resources. They know how to identify things that others wouldn't be able to. One thing I described, the services that we offer, they're really good for both sort of the front end and the back end of a research task that a person may have. At the front end, we can help you sort of cut through and give you good direction as far as what to look for and what resources to access. And then sort of at the back end, after you've gone through a research process with us, maybe using some other sources as well, you come back to us and sort of check to make sure you've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's, that you haven't missed anything, because that's something that people are very cognizant of when they're doing something. They want to produce something to, whether it's an outside entity, it could be a client, it could be a vendor, it could be superior within an organization, to make sure that they've covered the waterfront, basically. So we're here to make sure that give them a certain comfort level in that regard.
And that the list of citations is essentially complete, that they have left no stone unturned.
Precisely.
Well, for me, I'm obviously not from a law background or a legal background, but I found that being an insurance technologist and growing a company that's trying to transform the insurance industry in some way, that knowing a little bit more about its history has actually been very helpful to figure out and understand how it might transition into the modern era.
Sure.
Could you talk a little bit more about how you see the role of the library transitioning in the future?
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense what you described, because if you look at the industry as it is today, it's really hard to understand certain parts of it unless you understand where they came from and why things are done a certain way. And so, but by being able to, at an institution like this, trace different pieces, whether it's a coverage area, a certain segment of the business, access to surplus lines versus the flood insurance program versus, as you saw, we have multiple shelves just on the development of auto insurance, for instance. So that's that one line of insurance has a very unique and specialized history that if you want to understand, sort of everything about why things are done a certain way today, having at least some notion of where those things came from through the history is important.
Yeah, going back 130 years in some cases for some of this literature.
That's right. We started as when the library was founded, the insurance that was being written was fire insurance. It wasn't even a broad property form, right? It was, and all that has evolved over time, and we've tracked that in that history and collected all the resources that are relevant to it.
Wow. It's so fascinating. And I feel like a kid in a candy store in some ways, because I am an insurance nerd. Yeah. I know a lot of our listeners would call themselves insurance nerds as well. I have to plead guilty and
pull out my card as well. I've been in the business for 25 years. I started as a journalist. I worked for a publication called The Standard, a publication that we have in our collection going back, they go back about 150 years. That publication is actually a little bit older than a library. So I sort of have a kind of a broad perspective on the industry, and I fall in the same category that I at risk of getting lost down a corridor from time to time when I start looking at sources and finding something too interesting, and I have a lot of things I need to do.
Yeah, well, there's something wonderful about getting lost in a library, right? We lose when we Google. Right? I could go online and Google the history of automobile insurance, and I'd have 10 companies. The first 10 hits are people trying to sell me automobile insurance. So once I get past that layer of that. But here, you go to the section on automobile insurance, and like you said, at least 3 rows worth of literature, from no-fault insurance to even credit-based insurance for auto, which I have a particular interest in. There's something about seeing the books next to each other.
Yeah, it's sort of a serendipitous exploration of knowledge, as opposed to something when it's more focused and targeted. You just find the thing, and another part of my life, I like to go through old record stores, and you can find records online, for instance, for Amazon, but you might just find that one record, but you don't find the things that are next to it necessarily. So it's similar here at a library, that you go look for one thing, and you might find something else, but you might find utility, and then certainly something that you find of interest in that.
Exactly, and it's a book from 1936 next to a book from 1950 next to a book from 2019 that helped to sort of weave that narrative in a way. I don't know, it's sort of curated in a nice way.
Sure, yeah, that's precisely what it is. It is curated, and and the other part of what you lose when you only Google sort of on your own, that you get at a library like this, and you get at this library specifically, is the sort of the guidance of the librarians as expert researchers who can sort of help you cut down on wasted time or mistaken direction, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Now while the library is full of books, it also has many other resources, I'm coming to learn.
Yes.
I mean, you could talk about them generally, but one of the things that fascinated me most was the map room.
Yeah, that's one of when we have people come in and visit and give a sort of a 20-minute tour, that's always one of the highlights. We have a collection of Sanborn maps, which are maps that any fire insurance company would have had at the beginning of last century. A whole specialized shelves of them. As you've seen, they're very large, and they're large volumes, and you flip through, and they're organized by city, and you get down to the town and the street and the actual depiction of the building. It's sort of like Google Maps was 100 plus years ago, and you can look and you see what the building was made of and what occupancies were near it. So a fire insurance underwriter would get an application for an address, and they would look up that block and street and then find that location. They would know a lot of things about its construction. They would know what sorts of other buildings and structures were nearby it, what they were being used for. So just a wealth of information. That was sort of the InsurTech of the day, those keeping those maps updated.
Yeah. Well, they sort of, to me, served a very similar function to wandering through the stacks and finding the book that's adjacent to the book that you went looking for.
Right.
It sort of gives you this view, this literally top-down sort of drone level view of the geography. And
And those maps still have a practical use today. From time to time, someone will stop in and maybe they've looked up information online and they sort of want to confirm with an older source that hasn't been changed over time, where a firewall is, what's some sort of historic, construction, an old sidewalk or whatnot. So even though they're not merely historic relics, they also have some continued use as well.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that. For me, the thing that stuck out was, and I asked you this question, which is, do insurance carriers today and underwriters today even look at maps like that, right? We go online and we Google, does this restaurant have, a happy hour, to make sure that they're not serving alcohol, but are they right next door to a TNT factory, we joke, or like some other sort of more dangerous environmental hazard?
Right.
Just really looking at the maps start to, like I said, you see things adjacent to the things that you're looking for. That were really fascinating for me. What makes you excited to come to work every day? What's that for you, where you walk in and you say, "Woo, this is awesome"?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about the library as an institution. It has this proud history, and it's unique, and I like that
totally.
About it. And this is an industry that I've come to love. As I mentioned, I started as a journalist. I worked with the trade association and state government affairs, worked on public policy issues. I've known the library all that time. It's been part of my life. I took insurance courses here early in my career, the Associate in Risk Management program, the ARM, and the CPCU courses. So I obtained my designations through coursework here. And that's for a lot of people, the library has touched their professional lives in that way through as an educational institution. So people have an affinity with it, just as they might with a school, a high school, or college. We have a significant event every year called the Insurance Professional of the Year, where we honor somebody who has had a remarkable career in their industry for their service. That's a great event where people come together throughout largely the greater Boston area and recognize somebody who's given back. And I feel people have a great time there connecting with people that they've known in different elements of their careers, and it brings people together in a special way. So there's a lot of that sort of in the same way a library that serves the local community enriches and is sort of a place for community building for that, whether municipality or town. For the insurance industry, where we serve that sort of same purpose as well. So it's a very positive environment in that sense, that we're here to serve, we're here to help, we're here to connect, as opposed to some other industries where you're trying to outdo, compete, beat. So it's a positive place like that. And there's also a lot more that could be done with this institution. It can become more than it has been historically. So I'm really excited on a personal, professional level about those kinds of prospects.
I want to talk a little bit more about that. I want to dive in because we're sitting in a conference space right now. It's a large table, about 20 seats. Just across the hall, there's a classroom setting, sits about 20 people with a nice whiteboard and beautiful view outside over near State Street and Faneuil Hall. It seems like the space is primed for a lot of convening, a lot of networking.
Precisely.
Can you tell me more about your vision?
Yeah, and we've done some of that historically, and we've since, and I started here in January of this year, and we definitely have a plan to have more events within the library. We recently hosted a book launch event with Rob Galbraith.
I know Rob very well.
It was the timing worked out really well. He was going to be in Boston for a CPCU Actuarial Society meeting, and it was right around the time his book was coming out. And he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, this would be a good place for an event to talk about and have some copies of the book." And I said, "Yeah, it's a perfect place for that." And we had a really nice event. We had a lot of people come in. Rob talked about the different aspects of his book, how he got to write it. And it was, and that's the kind of thing we're looking to do more and more of, to get exactly convening, having people come in, talk about ideas in an environment, in a context where, you might not have some of the constraints of other conferences or whatnot. And in that regard, we're interested in doing more things, whether it's partnering with other entities, maybe trade associations or other organizations on holding events. They don't have to be at the library, but the library is a great spot for them. So there's a lot to sort of build on in that sort of, sense of community building, I think.
Sure. And we talk about innovation really sort of as a high level concept, but it seems like a safe space, right? It's not in a commercial setting.
Precisely.
It's not at a conference.
Precisely.
It's really meant to be an intellectual dialogue space.
Right. And there's a lot of different organizations that slice across different areas of the industry. It could be a demographic. It could be on gender. And this is a nice place for those kinds of organizations also to have, to have their events, because we're able to offer the space and our resources in a way that doesn't, sort of necessarily, it doesn't involve any one company or organization, devoting their space to it, for instance.
Right. Yeah. And it doesn't require sort of the institutional buy-in of, say, like a diversity initiative or an inclusion initiative.
Precisely.
It's really more public.
We're kind of in a no judgment zone. In that regard, one thing we actually haven't talked about yet is we're planning a summer movie series.
Oh, are there movies in insurance?
There are movies in insurance, and when I talk about there's actually we realized once we had the idea that the one we had to lead with was Double Indemnity, which, if you don't know, is a classic film noir starring Barbara Stanwyck and Fred MacMurray, and it's a classic movie that if you're a student of movie history, you're sort of supposed to know it. You're supposed to have seen it. So when I go out to different industry events and I talk about the library, and I tell them we're going to have a movie series on insurance topics, and I said, yes, how many people have seen Double Indemnity? And not a few, not too many people. And I said, well, you probably don't want to burden your families with it, but it might be on your list of things you need to do to be a full-fledged insurance nerd. So no judgment. We won't say you should have seen it already. You come to the library. That will be our first offering in the movie series, and I believe the date for that is June 16th. So here at the library, we'll have that. And we have 2 other movies planned. There's actually online voting available for that, but more modern movies. But I believe one is The Client, for instance, with Matt Damon.
Makes sense.
And as far as an offering, and what is it? The Rene Russo and Pierce Brosnan, and it's the remake, the Thomas Crown Affair.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So some really, really quality movies that have insurance aspects to them. I think Double Indemnity is sort of the one that's really focuses the most on insurance. We're really excited about that. It's sort of a different, fun, but still, with an educational, cultural kind of component to it, but it's all relates to insurance. I think that's exactly the kind of, a perfect type of event for this institution.
Yeah, I can't think of another space that would make perfect sense for.
Precisely.
And it sort of is, like the insurance industry is becoming a little bit more fun, a little bit more, interesting, bringing sexy back to insurance in a way, right? Like,
I don't know if we can go that far, but definitely an element of fun, frivolity and whatnot. Yeah, I'm certainly somebody who's enjoys a good sense of humor, and and there's no reason that you can't be sort of serious about the subject matter of your profession and take issues seriously and be serious about doing well in your work, but still enjoy having a good time, whether it's some laughs and that relates to a little bit back to the Insurance Professional of the Year event that I mentioned. That is an event where it's a lot of positive energy, a lot of people coming together and networking and reconnecting. It's like a good family get together as opposed to some of the dysfunctional ones you see on some of these.
True. And I feel like a movie or an event like that is a good starting point for conversation.
Sure.
Where you don't need to necessarily be a film critic, where you say, wow, that issue that we were dealing with in 1954 is still something that I see modern applications for.
Yeah, for sure. I think, even just the more general concept too of looking at how the insurance industry and its practices are reflected in pop culture. It's not something that is talked about a lot in pop culture, but to be able to start looking at that through a movie series. And again, it's something you would host for an entertainment value, but you might have some real world applications to think about, while these values and these practices have continued, where something else maybe has been left behind to the ash bins of history, and maybe for good reason. But watching a movie like that can give you the opportunity to think about those things
and to have a dialogue, like a conversation about how far we've come and maybe how far we still have to go.
Precisely.
I know we opened up one of the many journal articles here, and we're just fascinated at the advertisements and sort of the sexism or like the monolithic nature in which insurance is described, or it's find the right man to do the job.
Sure.
And that's changed.
You don't have to look too hard to find. It's just the presumption that there will be discussions and headlines that use the term insurance men make this decision and whatnot. And so the publishers at that time wouldn't have hesitated to just make the assumption and assume on the part of their readers that the insurance professionals involved were male. So
yeah, just an assumption. And looking at the Lloyd's floor, right, the photograph that you have upstairs with a authentic Lloyd's desk is all white men walking around and interacting. So it made a lot of sense. That was their market. That was their clientele. Now in the same journal, though, which was fascinating, we saw a special feature on airplanes, as if airplanes were sort of a new thing to insure personal flight or commercial flight. And so
it's sort of also a marker of time and progress that the insurance industry sees new innovation.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So the journals that we have here, they tell the story of society and its development through the eyes of a specific industry, through different perspectives in that. But for sure, in the same way that you could look at today's journals and you'd see a lot of discussion about geopolitical risks, cybersecurity. So they go back in the 50s, right? The current issue that the industry was dealing with at that time was post-war, but certainly there was, as you mentioned, a special issue on aviation, because at that time the insurance industry was figuring out how to provide insurance protection for this burgeoning new, industry that more and more, sort of regular Americans were taking advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were looking at pictures that had like a plane falling into a house, and the homeowner said, "Oh, I wasn't protected for aviation insurance." Right? They're dealing with the sorts of questions of how to deal with and price risk and package risk in a very dynamic way.
Precisely.
I have so much more to learn in this space.
I can see you're going to spend some time here in the future, Carrie-Ann.
I am going to spend a lot of time here in the future. So we will direct all of our audience to your online poll for movies. I think they would love to participate in that.
Yep.
And encourage everyone to stop by.
For sure.
Say hello to Paul and say hello to the librarians upstairs. I think there's probably a million research questions I have and a million research questions that y'all have.
Yeah.
What's the best way to interact with the library? Is it to just pop in?
Well, sure, that's a great way, and I do want to emphasize that if anyone in the insurance and risk management business finds themselves in Boston, whether it's for professional reasons or if you happen to be touring here during the summer, and you should come during the summer more than the winter, feel free to stop in and say hi. We're at 156 State Street. We're right across the street from the Custom House Tower, which is a significant landmark. We're right near Faneuil Hall and the site of the Boston Massacre. So we're right in the center of a historic district where you sort of have to visit if you're visiting Boston in any case. So do stop in and say hi if you're in those terms. But if you're coming in for a conference or whatnot and you have plans, you want to actually find us online, send me an email, or either the librarians, Megan or Sarah. Just let us know you're coming. We'll try to make a little time and provide you with a special welcome. Depending on our circumstances, we may be able to pull some materials that are about the organization that you work with, or that kind of a thing. And we're happy to do that. We are definitely sort of, we're in kind of growth mode, so we're looking to add new members. So, I definitely encourage people from all different stripes within the insurance and risk management business to sort of check us out, think about how we might be a resource for them, and consider membership. And then we're always sort of looking for support, in different ways. We're a nonprofit. We're actually founded with a public mission. Our bylaws actually require us to be sort of open to the public, and we encourage membership and patronage from people within the insurance business. And that's how we've always operated. So we do, we have an annual fund, and we actually encourage, people to make donations. So even if somebody doesn't decide to be a member, but they sort of recognize us that we're sort of providing a valuable service for the industry, and they feel inclined to support us, where our contributions are tax deductible. So, and then the other kind of support is sort of in-kind support. If you have you've been a part of the industry for while somebody in your family is, you're going through an attic and you find some books, journals, materials, advertising materials, before you throw them out, we may be interested in acquiring them. So just go ahead and again, send us an email, and then we could make something that you have, part of our collection, and preserve it for, generations to come.
Absolutely. And this is sort of like the NPR Drive donation, right? It's, you listen every day, you find value in these resources, it's important to support it.
Yep.
And I will say, as a InsurTech, a lot of subscriptions are super expensive, right? Like, try to get an AM Best subscription as a new company, forget about it. But I found that the insurance library subscription has far exceeded a due sub a couple $100, few $100 for an individual like myself to join and really extract a lot of value, not just from the history and the literature, but from the people that fill this space with such joy and such expertise and knowledge, then willingness to share that knowledge with people who come through. So thank you so much for being on the golf course today, Paul.
My pleasure. Thank you for visiting.
Yeah. Thank you for visiting the library, and thank you for visiting the golf course. Again, this has been Carrie-Ann Nadeau of Odeon and Paul Tetrault of the Insurance Library, the Executive Director here. Stop in, say hello, and we'll see you next time on the golf course.